You're listening to the Celestial Citizen podcast, and I'm your host, Britt Duffy Adkins. Celestial Citizen is a space media company with embedded urban planning values, looking to help shape a more equitable and just future for all of us in space. This podcast seeks to provide an opportunity for conversation about how to be a better interplanetary citizen and responsible steward of Earth and the cosmos. By engaging the global public, providing greater access to the space industry, and amplifying a more diverse set of voices, progress in space can equate to progress on Earth. We who are bursting with stardust can become celestial citizens. Welcome to Season 3 of Celestial Citizen Podcast. We're excited to kick things off with Dylan Taylor, Chairman and CEO of Voyager Space and commercial astronaut aboard Blue Origin's NS-19 mission this past December.
Space is many things: technical challenge, investment opportunity, frontier, but first and foremost, it is a tool for transformation.
We'll discuss Dylan's experience with the overview effect after becoming the 606th person to go to space, as well as the latest updates on Voyager Space and Space for Humanity as we head into an exciting new era of human spaceflight.
My notion or my reason for investing in space, yes, of course, you hope to get a return on your investment so you have the resources to do the other things that are important to you. But it's really more, how do you unlock the talent in the industry and how do you facilitate some of these great projects so that the industry can be healthy?
My guest on today's show is Dylan Taylor. Dylan is a global business leader and philanthropist. Currently, Dylan serves as chairman and CEO of Voyager Space, a multinational space exploration firm that acquires and integrates leading space exploration enterprises globally. As an early-stage investor in more than 50 emerging ventures, including Axion, Kepler, York, Astrobotic, Leo Labs, Relativity, Planet, as well as Celestial Citizen, Dylan is widely considered the most active private space investor in the world. On December 11th, 2021, Dylan flew to space as part of the crew of Blue Origin's New Shepard Mission 19, and also earned his commercial astronaut wings with the FAA. In 2017, Dylan founded the nonprofit and social movement Space for Humanity, which seeks to democratize space exploration and develop solutions to global issues through the scope of human awareness to help solve the world's most intractable problems. Dylan is also the founder and chairman of Multiverse Media, parent company of the popular space philosophy website 2211.world, as well as the Ad Astra Dinners, Multiverse Publishing, which publishes books by leading authors including Frank White, Isaac Asimov, and Jerry O'Neill. And Multiverse Media is also the executive producer of the documentary film The High Frontier. Thanks for being here, Dylan. I'm excited for today's conversation.
Oh, thank you so much, Britt. My pleasure. My honor to be here.
So, Dylan, you've become such a major influence on the space industry through the many different roles that you've played, whether it be investor, philanthropist, entrepreneur, and now even commercial astronaut. But how did you become interested in space in the first place?
That's going way back. I mean, literally, it was 3 or 4, I think, is when I first remember being kind of mesmerized by the promise of space, if you will. For me, it was as simple as watching Star Trek and just seeing sort of this utopian world where everyone got along and it was diverse. It was interesting, right? There was a sense of adventure and exploration. And I think that's my earliest memory of being mesmerized by the power of space.
Yeah, and it's interesting because so many people that come on this podcast too talk about really the influence that various forms of space media had in their decision to kind of get interested in this industry in the first place. Certainly a lot of Star Trek fans on here, that's for sure.
For me, to maybe expand just slightly on that, it was not only sort of the interesting drama behind it, but it was this notion that society could be more advanced and in many respects kinder and sort of more inclusive. And I know that sounds strange to sort of have that realization at that age, but it really did strike me that there was a better way for humans to live together. So I think it was extremely powerful.
Well, and I'm super excited to dive into the next question here because you're actually the first person to join this podcast that has actually been to space. And of course, I'm referring to your space flight aboard Blue Origin's New Shepard on December 11th of last year. So, what can you tell me about that experience and what it meant to you?
Life changing. And I know it's cliche, Britt, but it really was. Keep in mind, I've been thinking about this for years and years and years. So my expectations were actually quite high, even though I told myself I wasn't going to have any expectations. I was just going to experience the moment and be present. The fact is, I did have expectations going in, and it just smashed them completely. I mean, it's so much more profound and impactful than it even intellectually sounds. And I think it is one of those things you really have to experience to understand how visceral the change is inside of you, just seeing the Earth from space.
Well, and we talk a lot about the overview effect on this show. And now, of course, you're perhaps able to describe the difference between just theorizing about it and actually living it. So, in your opinion, how important is it for people to experience that, as you call it, that real visceral shift in cosmic perspective?
I think it's critical. I think it's critical. And I do think there probably are other ways to get to the same place. But going into the experience, I sort of had this worldview that, we're all in it together. We all have much more in common than what separates us. So I sort of had that ethos going in. The part that I didn't have, or certainly didn't have in such a acute way, is this sense of how much of a miracle our situation is. We think of ourselves as existing in the natural world, right? In fact, we even use that term, a natural world. The fact is, the natural world is not the way we're existing. The natural world, when you get up in space, you realize the entire universe, 99.9999%, is cold and hostile and desolate. And we have this little, very vulnerable miracle, this oasis in the middle of free space that's just this jewel and just this treasure that I just don't think people can fully appreciate, not only how rare it is and how much of a miracle it is, but how vulnerable it is. And it's just impossible to see the Earth from space and not just have that pierce you in a very, very deep way. So it did change me dramatically.
It's really fascinating because I mean, a lot of people do talk about how they'll say things like, oh, I've already got that perspective. I don't need to go to space to experience it. But I think what you're talking about there, it kind of proves that it is just something that's much deeper and something we can't necessarily understand. I mean, as much as you might feel like that's part of your core value system, there still just absolutely has to be this massive shift in the way that you kind of feel about things after seeing it for yourself in space. And I think when you compare it to even just history, right? People having limited ability to travel and then, sort of taking your first airplane ride, things like that. I feel like those are micro examples, but it's really interesting to think about. And especially as we start to open this experience up to more and more people as well.
Just one quick example that occurred to me here recently that I brought up to a couple of folks. It's like, I think, if you think about childbirth as an example, and I know you have children and I know you went through that experience. So I can intellectually understand what it means to be pregnant, what it means to carry a child, what it means to give birth, but I can't viscerally understand that experience without going through it. And I think it's very similar to that type of an experience because it's so impactful on you as a human being that no amount of kind of processing it intellectually will substitute for the experience.
And does experiencing this overview effect change the way that you think about what you're building at Voyager or the opportunities that you're creating with Space for Humanity?
It gives me a greater sense of urgency because I understand how powerful it is, the impact it can make on people. And so I feel like I have a fire lit behind me here to get more people up there, to democratize access to space, to get some destinations built up there, because I think that's really important. And yeah, just continue to spread the word that space is many things: technical challenge, investment opportunity, frontier, but first and foremost, it is a tool for transformation. And I just, want to sing that from the mountaintops so as many people as possible can hear that.
And I do want to dive into actually some of the things that you've got coming up with Space for Humanity as well, but we'll circle back to that because first, I'm also just curious about the logistics of the NS-19 mission as well. So, how much training or preparation was required for you to take part in this mission?
It was about a week of training on the ground, West Texas, near Van Horn, Texas, there. And I have to tell you, Britt, that was one of the best parts about the experience. I really enjoyed that, getting to know the crew, long days training by the fire pit at night under the stars. And one of the things I really enjoyed was the simulations we did. So once you're trained on all the systems, they then put you in the capsule and you have to go through this whole simulation where they throw the whole kitchen sink at you and you have to figure out how to respond. And I really enjoyed that. In fact, it's funny when they postponed the launch 2 days due to weather, several people reach out, bring their condolences and say, oh, you must be so disappointed. And the fact is, I was excited to spend another couple of days, doing that. It was like a fantasy space camp in a sense. It really was fun. And I love the crew members. I mean, I still speak with them almost daily, which is pretty extraordinary here a few months later, and have a bunch of trips planned with members of the crew doing different things this summer, and, a really amazing experience. Yeah, the training was about a week. It was so good that when we were on the pad getting ready to launch, I thought I would be terrified, especially T minus 10. Once you hit countdown, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to be scared. I mean, how can you not be? I was not nervous. I was not nervous. And it wasn't just me, Britt. The entire crew was totally fine because we'd been trained on the systems. We knew what was going to happen. We knew what the contingencies were. We knew what the redundancies were. And I trusted the system. I trusted the people. The only thing I was nervous about was getting scrubbed because they did 2 delays, one for 10 minutes and one for 5 minutes. So that was the only thing I was nervous about.
I mean, that is fascinating to me. If you look back at the history of spaceflight, and it's just to think now that this day that we're in at that time in 2021, and to kind of just feel not nervous about going to space. And we really are making the experience much more, I don't want to say commonplace because it's an exceptional experience, but right, like if you believe in like the future of bringing more and more humans into space, I mean, over time will become more commonplace, hopefully. So it's just fascinating to think about, but that's wild. I think I still would have been nervous, but it's kudos to you for not being nervous. That's fantastic.
Honestly, I don't think, because it wasn't unique to me. I think you would have been in the same state. I really do. But it really is shocking because I just thought to myself, okay, you're putting your life on the line. You're strapped to a controlled explosion. How can you not be scared? Right? I mean, there's just, we're all human. Honestly, I really wasn't. It's really surprising.
Yeah, that's wild. And I also want to chat about your commitment to philanthropy, which you brought along on this spaceflight with your pledge to donate the equivalent amount of your ticket price to worthy causes here on Earth. So, can you share a little bit more about this pledge and the causes that you chose to support through this initiative?
Buy one, give one was the pledge. It was just something that could be, a little bit catchy, people easy to understand. Unfortunately, we can't disclose what we paid for the ticket prices. So we need to be a little bit vague about it. And my thought was the narrative around, billionaire boys club and space is a rich person's game, which that narrative I have sympathy for because a lot of that narrative has to do with the fact that we have problems here on Earth. This can be seen as a real distraction. And why is it that everyone who's going is rich and white and mostly male? I'm sympathetic to all those statements. But my thought was, let's make sure it's a and conversation and not an or conversation. It's space and Earth. And how do we link the two? And the fact is, we need the few $100 million that it's going to be spent on spaceflight over the next couple of years in order to democratize access, in order to get the prices down, in order to prove the market out, right? That's just the nature of our capitalist system. And so if you believe that that's a necessary condition, and if you believe all this money is going to be spent, my thought was, how do you link it to issues here on Earth? And so my thought was buy one, give one, and make sure the give one is really focused on problems we have on Earth. For me, one of my passions is diversifying the space industry, which has been just atrociously a laggard in diversity and inclusion, in my view. So I thought very highly of the Brooke Owens Fellowship, wanted to support that. Many people know there's an adjunct to that, the Patty Grace Smith Fellowship for African American professionals. I wanted to support that. I also wanted to support Mission Astro Access, which was founded by a couple of folks, including George Whitesides, that is giving people with disabilities and other challenges access to zero-G flights and other ways to experience space. And then lastly, there's an organization called Adisia Global Nutrition just a phenomenal leader and entrepreneur that I knew from the Aspen Institute named David Salem, and I wanted to support her. She's focused on malnutrition in Africa specifically. It's quite difficult to actually get resources to the actual people in need, and she's really done a great job focused on that. So those are the ones I chose to support in addition to Space for Humanity. And it really was just a call to action to hopefully get other commercial astronauts to do something similar. And notably, I'm not telling them what to donate to. I say, pick whatever cause you think is appropriate. Presumably, you're not spending your last nickel on your space flight. So double down. You're lucky to be able to go. So pay it forward.
Yeah, I love that. And those are definitely some really great organizations as well. I think you're right. There's definitely been a lot of polarization in the space industry around kind of that, billionaires in space narrative. And so hopefully things like that, like the buy one, give one pledge, hopefully that picks up and more people do that to kind of help change the narrative around that. But the other thing too is I think a lot of people wonder whether or not spaceflight will really become affordable enough for them to participate in it in the future. So, do you think that space tourism and commercial spaceflight will eventually become so affordable that most people are able to go? And if so, when do you see that happening?
So I think if the benchmark is, let's say, cross country flight on Southwest Airlines, that's the benchmark. I think it will happen eventually, but we're probably 25 years away from something like that, realistically. If we're talking about a business class ticket to Europe, I think we'll be there in 5 years or less. I think that's where we're headed. The New Shepard vehicle is genius, in my view. I mean, it's just absolute genius. There is no pilot. Of course, you have a mission control, but it's reusable. It's infinitely scalable, right? You just need to have a launch pad with vertical clearance and airspace that you can close around it. So they could have a launch pad in Europe, they could have one in the UAE, they could have one in South America. So I do think it scales well, and I think the design is brilliant. And that's not to say Virgin Galactic's not or other vehicle providers aren't. I just am more familiar with the Blue Origin design because I flew on it and trained on it. But I do see that scaling. Jeff and his team, Bob Smith, and all of them are looking at bringing this out to the masses. So it is a focus of theirs. So I do see that probably in 5 years or less, it's going to be, let's say, 50 grand or something like that. And that's purely my guess. I don't have any inside information, but that's where I think we're headed. Now, that's still a lot of money. People lose track of the fact that that's probably more than the average employee in the US with a college degree makes out of college. I think we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that we can further democratize it. Organizations like Space for Humanity, people hopefully being charitable with their resources. But I think that's really, really important. My vision for that is to get as many people from as many communities up there so that they can then tell the story in their communities. And ironically, we're all the same, right? The only way you can tell that story and have someone really fully understand it is it's got to be someone that they can relate to. If it's a billionaire saying, hey, we're all the same, it falls a little flat, right? With a lot of people who are like, I don't get that. So that's really my thought around that.
For some of our listeners who might be newer to the space industry, I mean, honestly, I think that potential, for like a 25-year time horizon, if that ends up being the case to affordability, I think that would shock a lot of people. Like, I think if you ask people who are sort of opposed to human spaceflight right now, I think that they probably would be somewhat shocked to learn kind of how quickly we are making progress in decreasing the cost of spaceflight. Now, you also might be one of the busiest people I know in the space industry, and it's pretty inspiring to see how many different sectors you're active in at the moment. So, I want to dive into a few of these roles, but first, I was hoping that you would be able to share a little bit about Voyager Space and how you all are differentiating yourselves from other companies.
The thesis behind Voyager Space was that this new space phenomenon is real. The technology is real. It's been promised for a long time. It's finally ready for prime time. So that is the good news. The not so good news is the industry itself is not scaling particularly well. So we have a lot of very successful entrepreneurial led companies that are successful to a certain stage, but aren't necessarily able to take their game to the next level and scale their businesses. And the reason why that's important to the industry is if you look at these large infrastructure projects that we need to get done, including private space stations and laying the infrastructure between here and the moon and all the other projects we need to get done, there's really no new space in quotes company capable of getting those done, SpaceX might be an exception if they were really focused on it, but they're really focused on launch. And now, of course, it's always been about Mars. So the thought was, how do you marshal the resources of new space, institutionalize it, professionalize it in the best sense of those words, so that you can create a prime capable operating company that's denominated on entrepreneurialism and innovation. That's the idea behind it. So to answer your question, what can Voyager do? Hopefully that other new space companies can't. The idea would be we could build a private space station, or we could put a position, navigation, and timing system in between here and the moon, in large projects like that. And presumably the only other companies that would be able to do that are the large primes. They're not necessarily focused on those particular types of projects, right? So one of the quips that I have is the companies that have the capability don't have the ambition, and the companies with the ambition don't have the capability. So that's really, we're trying to marry the two. That's the idea behind Voyager Space. We were very fortunate that we were one of the winners of the International Space Station replacement contract, CLD, that NASA issued in December. So we'll be one of the companies, along with Blue Origin and Northrop Grumman, building a replacement to the ISS. And we're speaking here in early March, of course, and a lot's happening with respect to the ISS and tensions with Russia, and that particular issue is becoming very, very germane. But as it stands right now, our station, Starlab, will be online in 2027.
That's amazing to think about. I do want to dive in a little bit, though, on what you just mentioned there. It's early March right now at the time of this recording, and we're sort of all watching the situation with Ukraine and Russia intensify. So, what do you expect this geopolitical conflict will mean for the space industry?
I don't want to say I called this, because I don't think anybody called the threat of nuclear war and invasion of Ukraine. But I did anticipate sort of two ecosystems for space, the Western one and the sort of Chinese-Russian one. I didn't think it'd be three. I didn't think there would be a Russian, a Chinese, and a Western. But it was clear to me that not only within space, but really our global financial system is really bifurcating into the Chinese-led one and the US-led one. And Russia is going to likely, at least my thinking was, likely side with the Chinese side of things, just given their leadership. I think the citizens would pick another route. So I'm not surprised by that. What I am surprised by is the rhetoric and the extreme intensity by which this is happening and how quickly it's happening. I feel bad for the Russian scientists and the people within the industry in Russia, because presumably they're well-intentioned, they're well-trained, they're smart people, and I think they're the big losers in all of this. So I do feel bad for them. Hopefully there's brighter days ahead, but right now it looks pretty bleak.
Yeah, things definitely intensified very quickly. Watching that all kind of transpire, and even just some of the commentary on Twitter as well around this from leadership, it's been kind of mind-boggling to watch this all play out. Hopefully we start to, see improvements in the situation, but certainly it's very concerning for right now. And on the topic of the transition away from ISS to more private space stations, what do you predict is going to happen? Do you think that there's going to be more and more activity in terms of establishing these private space stations? Do you think that that will sort of, in many ways, be the popular route to go over surface operations in the future? Generally, what do you expect to see in the next 10 years?
A flourishing of destinations is the short story. The ISS, which is, a genius of humanity, and I think the most complicated thing humans have ever built until very recently, really a symbol for peace and cooperation internationally. I think it's fantastic. But, it is a little bit of a Rube Goldberg in the sense that it's kind of been put together hodgepodge. And you wouldn't have an astronaut on a treadmill next to a thin film experiment, right? If you were to design these things de novo. So I think we need new destinations. I think they need to be special purpose. The ISS orbit is not the right orbit, in my view. It's sort of selected by committee, which is never a good way to select anything, typically. So I anticipate 3 to 4 of these in the next 10 years. I think they will be special purpose to a sense, either more scientific or more tourism related or more manufacturing related. And I think they'll be in unique orbits, whether they're polar or sun synchronous or, other useful orbits. So that's what I would anticipate.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting to watch all of that play out. I mean, that's a radical shift in terms of everything that we've known so far. We've sort of solely relied on the ISS, so it'll definitely be interesting to see. And generally speaking, what trends are you seeing right now in the commercial space sector that are really the most exciting to you? Like, what are you looking forward to most this year?
One thing this crisis in Europe has illuminated is space-based communications. So Starlink has kind of come to save the day with internet communications. It would appear in Ukraine. OneWeb's coming online. Laser comm is a huge innovation within space-based communications that's really starting to find its stride. And we're generating a lot more data in space, right? Lots more ones and zeros. And if you look at the K-band system and the ground station infrastructure we have for space-based data, it's pretty antiquated. So I would anticipate continued flourishing of space-based communications and laser comm and space-based internet. I would anticipate we're going to continue to make steps forward on what I would call LEO servicing. And that could be anything from servicing satellites to cleaning up space debris. We have a big space debris issue. If space gets further militarized and we have some offensive maneuvers taking out satellites, we could pollute orbits up there. It's a pretty easy thing to do. So I think we need technologies that allow us to mitigate space debris and increase space sustainability. So I think that'll be another push this year. I'm hoping SpaceX gets orbital with Starship. It's a heavy lift, no pun intended, to do that. But if they pull that off, I was down in Boca Chica for several days when Elon gave his speech on Starship. That is a game changer, Britt. It really is. You could get $500 a pound to orbit, presumably, if they get the cadence that they're looking for with Starship, which is just a total game changer. We were talking earlier about space tourism and price points. You really could do a point to point on terra firma for the price of a business class ticket if they're able to perfect that technology. That is a real thing. That's not science fiction. Now, I think it's going to take some time to work out the kinks. So I think we're looking at a few years at least until it's ready for prime time. But even if that's the case, we're still looking at mid-decade, which would be amazing.
Because if you think about where the state of space industry was like 20 years ago or something, it's just like, it's absolutely wild how much has been achieved in that. For better or worse, we obviously talk about the pros and cons of different kind of precedents being set or activities happening in space, but certainly you can't deny the technological innovation that has taken place. That is for sure.
Just back in 2016, I remember vividly talking to space CEOs, smart people, friends of mine, telling me that rocket reusability was never going to happen, ever. It was a fool's errand. These are smart people who know physics, and that was only 6 years ago. And here we are.
We should never limit ourselves or limit our imagination, because when you have people that are really motivated to solve problems and figure things out, there's no shortage of ways to sort of, I guess, leapfrog the status quo or sort of how things have been done in the past. And ultimately, feels like we're really starting to see some of the fruits of that labor that happened where, there needed to be sort of a shakeup in the way that we thought about spaceflight, I think. And obviously, rocket reusability has been a complete game changer. So it's only going to continue, I think, to really transform our view of transportation on this planet and off. Another topic I wanted to chat about is there's obviously a real push for SPACs in the space community. Do you think SPACs will continue to remain a popular vehicle for more retail investors to gain access to this industry?
A short answer is no, I don't think so. I think the SPACs that have de-SPACed, which is kind of a strange verb, but it means once a SPAC's announced to actually consummate the transaction, have not done well. And by not done well, I'm being generous when I say that. I think a lot of them are down, 80, 90% even. So I think the market, unfortunately, is very fickle, it has a long memory. And so I think it's going to be very difficult for these SPAC deals to get done. It's one thing to announce them, but to get the shareholders to approve it and de-SPAC is difficult. And if you're able to do that, but you don't have a PIPE, an acronym that stands for private investment in public equity, which is sort of the investment alongside the merger, then all you're really doing is you're creating a public company with no capital, which if that's the case, you might as well stay private. I think it's very challenging for companies to SPAC in this environment, not only within space, but in the industry. Now, SPACs have been around for a long time. They'll cycle in and out of favorability. I think we, in my opinion, got way too heated with them and some of the valuations were unsustainable. So in general, I think it's going to be very difficult for companies to go that route, which is probably a good thing because, what I tell my team is getting public is the easy part. Being a high quality public company is the difficult part. And you really can't skip any steps. The market is extremely unforgiving. You can't announce your numbers because you can't close your books, or if you miss your numbers dramatically, the market will punish you for that. And it takes years to overcome that sentiment.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think that's a really interesting kind of take on that as well, because you're right, for a while, the whole SPAC world was really frothy, so I think it's important to kind of focus on just making sure that you're able to build that sort of long-term character as a company, I guess, or sort of, as you said, I mean, the market's just so unforgiving, so you really have to be really thoughtful about how you move forward, of course. And in terms of commercial activity on the lunar surface, what do you think the next 10 years will look like? What do you think the moon is going to ultimately shape up to be?
We definitely won't be back in the next 10 years. The original 2024 Artemis target, I think, even when it was announced, people didn't think that was realistic necessarily. And now, of course, here we are 2022, and we're really not off the ground yet. Again, sorry, another bad pun, but I do think we're going to get some private missions this year. I think astrobotics, intuitive machines. So I think we're going to be landing more spacecraft on the moon, which is great. I think that's wonderful. But I think getting humans back there, my guess is 2028, something like that, 2029 maybe, which is fine. I mean, that's right around the corner. We'll get the first woman on the moon, which I think is incredibly important. So I'm looking forward to celebrating that achievement for humanity. You get this, Britt, because you're in the industry and you know the technical aspects of it. But what people I don't think fully appreciate is we need more infrastructure. So, for example, GPS looks down, not up, right? So if you get past geo, you really have no navigation. Now, there's star trackers and other things that you can use, but if you're looking to navigate in real time with a spaceship, you need a system. You need a PNT system, position, navigation, and timing system. It would be like saying, we want to settle different part of some remote locale, let's say in Siberia, but the first thing you really need to do is lay the electricity lines and the communication lines or whatever the case may be before you can really have a sustainable presence there. And I know this is, I think, the way Elon thinks about Mars as well, is what's the infrastructure you need to have in place in order to effectuate that. So I think with the moon, we have a lot of wood to chop to get back there. In terms of what we're going to do there, I think mining is probably the best near-term opportunity. There are two resources on the moon that we need that we don't have in abundance here on Earth. One is helium-3, which the world's running out of helium here on Earth. You can make a business case for that, I think. And the second are rare earth minerals. And ironically, they're not that rare on Earth. I don't know why they call them rare earth minerals. They're concentrated in where they occur, and China controls about 90% of the supply. It's less to do with them being rare and more has to do with where the resources lie. And they're used for advanced technology systems, weapon systems. It is an area of national security. So I think those will be two areas that we focus on the moon, in addition to science and all the other important things that we need to do while we're there.
There's definitely going to be an interesting diversity of interests and activities on the lunar surface over time. And I also really appreciate the fact that you brought up infrastructure planning as well, because coming to the space industry with an urban planning background, that's one thing that I feel like for the last few years, I've really been trying to encourage people to talk about a lot more, is the fact that there is just all of this logistical work and there's all this infrastructure that's needed. And really, I mean, of course, engineers are super valuable and critical for those conversations. But really, I wish that we would bring more planners, especially planners with like transportation backgrounds or infrastructure backgrounds, to really get involved in these conversations as well, so that we can make sure that we're maintaining the kind of flexibility and optionality that we want for the future. I mean, the worst thing that we could do is close ourselves off to potential opportunities in the future by just making the wrong decisions today. So I appreciate that you brought that up, because I feel like that's a very critical area that we need to focus on right now.
And systems thinking in general. I studied urbanization a bit myself, not at the level that you have, but I remember we worked on an urbanization project with the World Economic Forum. And it was fascinating, but we were focused on Tianjin. That was the case study in China. And one of the emerging thoughts from that project was the single most important determiner of successful urbanization was transportation system. And it sounds kind of obvious, but going in, it could have been the healthcare system, it could have been the education system, it could have been the density of housing. It could have been a number of things, but it was only by getting all the systems thinkers together and looking at it holistically that we could kind of come to that conclusion. I think space needs a similar approach, I think, to really get at the right answers.
It's interesting because when I started talking to folks in the urban planning community about my interest in sort of applying a lot of these principles to space, actually, the people that were probably the most supportive right off the bat were transportation planners. So, like over at USC, Marlon Bornett is a big transportation planner and an expert in that field. One of his first jobs was working at NASA. So, he was very supportive of kind of trying to bridge these two fields together. I think there's a huge opportunity there. We need to encourage more people to kind of view that aspect, especially of what we're doing in space, as being more, multidisciplinary in nature. Would you say that you're more interested in investing in low Earth orbit, lunar surface, or lunar orbit activities right now?
So if it's Voyager, I would give you a different answer because we're looking at really anything infrastructure related. Right now, interested in things like flight software, manufacturing capability, things of that nature. On the personal side, really, and I'm honored to be an investor with you, Britt. I'm really focused on the entrepreneurs and the talent behind the companies themselves, because my notion or my reason for investing in space, yes, of course, you hope to get a return on your investment so you have the resources to do the other things that are important to you, including being charitable. But it's really more, how do you unlock the talent in the industry and how do you facilitate some of these great projects so that the industry can be healthy? When I first got involved in early stage investing in the industry a long time ago, 2008, which was very early in this industry, it was really not because I was some great investor or anything like that. It was really to try to light the fire, get some kindling going to get the companies to a certain stage where they could attract larger capital from VCs and private equity, because there just wasn't any early stage in capital at that time. So that's kind of how I think about it. I love to back female-led companies. I love to back entrepreneurs who are passionate about what they're doing. And ideally, they're working on an important problem for the industry, but they're also have some social aspect to what they're doing that compels them to do what they're doing. So a long-winded way of saying it doesn't really matter specifically what area it's in, as long as the entrepreneur, I believe in the team and I believe in what they're doing.
And what advice would you give to aspiring space entrepreneurs?
Get a mentor. Get a mentor. I think that's the single biggest accelerator to anyone's career. Find someone that you respect and admire that has been successful in what you're trying to achieve, and ask them to mentor you and learn from them.
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of skipped over this, but I want to go back to it. So, which hopes to expand access to space and also just closed applications for the first ever citizen astronaut and leadership program called Humanity One, is going to be coming up soon. So, what can you share about that program and when do you expect to announce crew selections and a launch date?
So that organization I founded, and I'm the current chairman of the board, so I'm on the board, but I'm not running it day to day. The executive director, I think you might have had her on the show even, Britt, is Rachel Lyons.
Yeah, we had her on last year.
Total rock star, just one of my favorite people in the industry, and she's just absolutely crushing it. So she and her team at the Space for Humanity level will pick the crew. I'm not involved in that. I anticipate that happening soon, in the next 30 to 45 days. The challenge really for that organization currently, and it's a challenge really for all of us, is getting access to flights, right? And there's a big backlog, and a lot of the people who are flying right now are paying a fair amount of money to go. So I think that's the challenge. They are ticket holders on Worldview. They're ticket holders on Space for Perspective. They've received large donations from both Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic. So the organization is quite healthy. Everything's tracked to fulfill the mission. It's just getting access to the flights. That's the key thing.
Okay, and pivoting a bit here on Celestial Citizen podcast, we always ask people this question. This is our last question before we go into our lightning round, and I always love to close out on this. So, at Celestial Citizen, we're all about the idea that humans can become not only better stewards of Earth, but also better interplanetary citizens. So, in your opinion, what is one important way in which people can work toward becoming celestial citizens today?
Start meditating, daily meditation. So that's the easiest way to get the ethos
How long have you been meditating?
8 years, maybe 9 years, something like that.
And is it just like, a little bit each day? Or are you fairly like consistent with it?
Yeah, daily, occasionally miss a session, but I try to do it every day in the morning. I have sort of a daily morning routine that I do. And yeah, try to do that at least 6 days a week, ideally 7 days a week, but been doing that for about 8 years now, 8, 9 years.
I feel like I did it briefly and then I had kids. But now I think actually having kids, now more than ever, probably meditation would be very helpful to me. Yeah, that's got me thinking maybe I got to try that again and get back into it.
I think it is a way to see the world in a different way, a more
Yeah.
meaningful way to see the world.
So now we're moving into our lightning round of quick questions. This is a little bit different. You can feel free to give a brief explanation as to why you picked what you did, or you can leave us in suspense with no explanation at all. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. All right. Would you rather live on the moon or Mars?
Mars,
On Mars, your favorite space hobby would be what?
stargazing,
All right. Your favorite book about space?
the high frontier.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. That was a book that, inspired me a great deal as well. It was something I read when I was first getting into the space industry. And of course, which we didn't actually get a chance to talk about, but of course, The High Frontier was, as mentioned in your bio, was the documentary that Multiverse Media produced last year, which was really, really inspiring. So, did you read that book like early on in your career? I'm just curious.
It wasn't that long ago. It was like 5 years ago or something. And when I read it, I thought to myself, why is it that I didn't know who Jerry O'Neill was? And that's what inspired me to make the film. I'm like, well, this is an unsung hero of the industry, and someone's got to tell this story. So that's how that came about.
Yeah, and it's just super interesting if you go back and like to see the history of the fact that this Princeton class, was kind of the source of a lot of inspiration for what inspires, somebody like Jeff Bezos or others in terms of kind of how we live and work and thrive in space. It's really interesting. But anyway, okay, sorry, I digress. I know this is supposed to be the lightning round. Okay, so favorite space philosopher.
Frank White.
He's awesome. He was on season 2 of the podcast here as well. So a lot of people enjoyed that episode as well. So I totally agree there. All right, your favorite space TV show or movie?
Star Trek.
And do you like Star Wars? Because I feel like a lot of people are, they're either Star Trek or Star Wars. I don't know. Or do you like both?
I like both. I like the sense of adventure. I like kind of the fact that they have all these different kinds of alien species and it's kind of quirky. I like all that. I don't like the unhopeful nature of a lot of the good versus evil. And so that's the only part that just bothers me a little bit. It's sort of like The Expanse. The books are great. The show's great. It's well acted, but it's a bleak future. And I like a more hopeful future. And so I'll watch all those shows. I love them all. Don't get me wrong. But it's just Star Trek resonates with me more deeply than just about anything else.
I'm with you there because sometimes it feels like a lot of the space media that comes out is really negative or dystopian or, even The Expanse. The Expanse I love, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it's like this cautionary tale of what you don't want to have happen basically in space. So I'd love to see more kind of positive futures in space played out for people to kind of enjoy. But anyway, okay, The Martian, Interstellar, or Contact?
Ooh, man. Jill Tarter I'm a huge fan of her. She's a friend, so I'm going to pick Contact.
Such a great film and really inspiring too. I love that it's, Jodie Foster, female lead, so Contact, very high up on my list as well. Okay, worst space movie ever.
Spaceballs.
I don't think anyone's actually said that before, I'm pretty sure. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot, to be fair, there's a lot of bad space movies out there. Okay, favorite planet or moon?
Titan.
That's a good answer. Yeah, see, I opened this up because at first we asked people just favorite planet, but then I feel like the moons in our solar system are so much more interesting sometimes. Okay, permanently grounded on Earth or a one-way trip to Mars?
How old am I?
However old you are today.
I would stay here. If it was retirement home or one-way trip to Mars, we're all on a one-way trip in a sense. So I would definitely do that.
That's true. Oh, that's a good point. We all are on a one-way trip. Yeah. Okay, something most people don't know about you.
Let's see. I am a huge athletic nut.
Really?
And do a lot of triathlons and weekend warrior 5Ks where I try to beat my competition. I'm super competitive. Maybe that's a better way to say it. Very
Yeah.
competitive.
Wow, good for you. Those are not easy competitions. So wow, that's incredible. And the biggest misconception about the space industry.
That space is a billionaires boys club, and it is dominated by people who don't care about humanity or humanity's future.
Yeah, I agree. We've definitely got to change that narrative because there's a lot more to the space industry than just that, which is something we talk about here often. All right. And let's say you have the opportunity to go back in time and change one major historical event that happened in the space industry. What's the event and what do you change?
The decision to develop the space shuttle. We should have stuck with Saturn V and continued to develop the Saturn platform, because we lost probably 20 years with the space shuttle. And instead of it being, daily access to flight, it ended up being a $1 billion launch vehicle. That was a seminal decision that put us back 20 years.
Okay, and you're sent on a long duration mission. What's more important, choosing your crew, choosing the food, or choosing the destination?
Crew, 100%. That's, in many respects, the only thing that matters.
Okay, and last one. Finish this sentence. In 50 years, we'll all be what?
Celestial citizens.
I love it. I love it. What a great way to close out this episode. Thank you so much, Dylan, for joining Celestial Citizen Podcast. Just a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I'm sure your experience with the overview effect and participating in spaceflight will also be inspiring to many others listening, and certainly was super interesting to hear about firsthand here. So thanks again for your time today.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Britt.
3, 2, 1. We have liftoff.
Let me take you on a little trip. My supersonic ship's at your disposal if you feel so inclined. Alright. Go travel faster than light. That little Elon Musk will be left in the dust, so alright. Say alright.
And to our community of Celestial Citizens, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Celestial Citizen Podcast. This episode would not be possible without the terrific work of this show's editor, Victor Figueroa. Thank you, Victor. And also a very special thank you to Graham Clark, who created the amazing intro and outro music for this podcast.
Needs to be outside. Nobody's gonna travel second class. There'll be equality and no suppression of minorities.
If you're interested in learning more about Celestial Citizen, and I hope you are, then check out celestialcitizen.com. You can also follow along on Twitter at Celestial Citizen and Instagram at The Celestial Citizen. And be sure to sign up for the Celestial Citizen newsletter on Substack. You can find the link to all of this on our website.
Ain't no bad chick. Ain't no lie. Laugh so hard you'll cry.
If you're interested in supporting the mission of Celestial Citizen, consider making a donation on our website, or you can always reach out to learn more about opportunities to sponsor this podcast. A major component of Celestial Citizen is feedback and public participation. We want to hear what you have to say. So let us know what you think about humanity's future in space and what it should look like. Please share your voice and your unique perspective on social media, or if you prefer, all of the Celestial Citizen articles can also be found on Medium. So drop a comment and join the conversation. If you love today's podcast, please have your friends and family subscribe on whatever device or platform you listen to podcasts on, and leave a stellar review so others can get hooked as well. That's all for now, Celestial Citizens. I'll be back next week for another episode. In the meantime, don't be afraid to take up space.